Anika and Rajiv Patel seemed like the perfect couple, respected, devoted, and living a peaceful life in the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles. But beneath Anika's graceful exterior hid a dangerous secret, one that would shatter their world, and lead to a murder more chilling than anyone could imagine. In the peaceful suburbs of Los Angeles, the Patel residence stood out not because it was grand or flashy, but because it radiated quiet elegance. The house, with its neatly trimmed hedges and always blooming roses, was a reflection of the life Rajiv and Anika Patel had built, calm, orderly, and admired by everyone around them. Neighbors often waved at Anika as she watered her garden in the early mornings, always dressed in simple yet tasteful clothing, her long black hair tied neatly, her face framed by a graceful calmness that rarely broke. Rajiv, her husband, was a successful cardiologist, well known not only for his skills at the nearby hospital, but also for his warmth. To outsiders, they were the ideal couple, an immigrant success story wrapped in sophistication and dignity. The Patels had lived in the neighborhood for almost a decade. They hosted Diwali gatherings, offered homemade sweets during the holidays, and donated generously to the local school fundraisers. Anika was especially respected in the Indian American community for her traditional values and gentle demeanor. She taught cooking classes at the cultural center and was often seen organizing temple events. Rajiv, busy with his medical practice, rarely attended these functions. But his absence was understood. He was saving lives. What could be more important? No one imagined that behind the tranquility of their home, something darker was brewing. It was a chilly Tuesday morning when the quiet was shattered. Police cars rolled into the cul-de-sac around 6:45 a.m. Flashing lights reflected off the neighbors' windows as people peered out, confused and concerned. Moments later, the medical examiner's van arrived. By 8 a.m. it was clear. Someone had died inside the Patel home. The body of Rajiv Patel had been found in the garage. According to early reports, he had been discovered by his wife Anika, who had gone looking for him after he failed to show up at the hospital for his shift. She told officers she found him slumped over in the driver's seat of his car. The garage door was closed. The engine had stopped running, but the strong smell of exhaust lingered in the air. Her voice reportedly shook as she told the responding officers that it must have been a terrible accident. Carbon monoxide poisoning, she suggested. Maybe he had come home exhausted, left the car running, and fallen asleep without realizing it. News of Rajiv's sudden death spread quickly. Shock rippled through the community. Within hours, neighbors gathered outside the Patel house, whispering in disbelief. No one could understand how something so tragic could happen to someone so intelligent, so careful. Rajiv wasn't the type to make careless mistakes. He was meticulous, even obsessive about safety. His friends recalled how he checked the stove knobs twice before leaving the house. A man like that wouldn't accidentally leave a car running in a closed garage. Still, people clung to Anika's version of events. Grief-stricken and dazed, she had sat on the curb while investigators moved in and out of her house. Her eyes were hollow, her expression unreadable. Some said it was shock. Others, though they didn't voice it, sensed something else, something strange. Detectives initially saw no reason to doubt her story. On the surface, everything pointed to a tragic accident. But as they reviewed the scene more closely, small things began to raise red flags. The car's engine had barely been running. Its temperature was still low. There were bruises on Rajiv's neck that didn't fit with carbon monoxide poisoning. No signs of forced entry. No indication of a robbery. And then there was the garage door sensor. According to logs retrieved from the smart home system, the garage had opened and closed at suspiciously precise intervals, too deliberate to be random. It would take days before the full picture started to form, but even in those first few hours, the truth had already begun to whisper through the cracks. What seemed like a terrible misfortune was about to be revealed as something far more sinister, and at the center of it all was the one person no one had ever suspected. As the initial shock of Rajiv Patel's death began to settle, the investigation quietly shifted into a different gear. What had first appeared to be a tragic accident was beginning to show signs of something more disturbing. The medical examiner's early findings were the first clue. While the cause of death was initially presumed to be carbon monoxide poisoning, the autopsy told a more complicated story. Rajiv had indeed inhaled some exhaust fumes, but not nearly enough to be fatal on their own. Instead, the bruising around his neck suggested strangulation. Specifically, manual pressure applied with considerable force. That single detail changed everything. Detectives returned to the Patel house the following day, this time with a search warrant. They combed through the garage, taking photographs, collecting fingerprints, and checking the car's onboard system. Forensic technicians noted that the vehicle's engine had only run for a short time. too short to have produced a lethal amount of carbon monoxide. Additionally, the placement of the car's keys left neatly on the passenger seat felt wrong. Most people who accidentally fall asleep in their car don't think to remove the keys first. The garage floor showed signs of a recent scuffle, small scuff marks near the driver's side door and a faint smear on the wall that tested positive for blood. All these subtle inconsistencies began to pile up. Back at the police station, detectives reviewed Rajiv's phone records and hospital schedule. He had been expected at work early that morning, and according to his co-workers, he had confirmed his shift just the night before. Rajiv was known for his punctuality. To suddenly disappear without notice was not just uncharacteristic, it was alarming. Text messages sent by a hospital administrator after he failed to show up were never read. That, combined with his wife's vague timeline of events, raised serious questions. Anika had told investigators that she last saw Rajiv around 11 p.m. the previous night and assumed he had gone to sleep in the guest room due to an early shift. When she awoke the next morning and couldn't find him, she claimed she went to look in the garage where she discovered his body. Her story, on the surface, sounded plausible, but when detectives examined the smart home system installed in the Patel residence, a more troubling timeline emerged. The garage door had opened just after midnight and then closed again minutes later. It didn't open again until 6:30 a.m., the time Anika claimed she discovered the body. The implication was clear: someone had been in that garage in the middle of the night. The security camera above the front door had been turned off intentionally. It had last recorded footage at 11:52 p.m. before going dark. When it powered back on, it was already daylight. More disturbing still was the toxicology report. Rajiv had small traces of a sedative in his system, one commonly used to treat anxiety. It was not something he had ever been prescribed, and certainly not something that would be taken before a long day at the hospital. Investigators were beginning to suspect that Rajiv had been drugged, possibly while he slept, and then murdered to make it look like an accident. As the evidence mounted, the image of the devoted housewife began to unravel. Anika remained calm during questioning, but detectives could sense the cracks forming. She showed little emotion when speaking of her husband. Her grief, if present at all, seemed rehearsed. The forensic team sent her clothes from that night for testing, and the results revealed tiny blood traces on the sleeve of her robe, traces that matched Rajiv's DNA. What had once looked like a household tragedy was now being treated as a deliberate killing. Police weren't just trying to determine how Rajiv had died, they were now focused on who had wanted him dead. And slowly, all roads were leading back to the one person who had claimed to love him the most. With suspicion now hovering over Anika Patel, detectives turned their focus to uncovering the deeper layers of the couple's life, what lay beneath the polished exterior of their home. Rajiv's phone was the first place they looked. For a man who seemed meticulous and private, his digital footprint was surprisingly revealing. He had maintained regular email communication with colleagues and friends, and one particular thread caught investigators' attention. It was a private exchange between Rajiv and an old friend from medical school, written just a few weeks before his death. In it, Rajiv expressed concern about irregularities in his finances. Large sums of money were missing from their shared savings account. Transfers had been made to an unfamiliar name. He had confronted Anika once, but she dismissed it as a banking error. He wasn't convinced. The more they read, the clearer it became that Rajiv had been quietly trying to piece together a mystery of his own. He had started compiling statements and even reached out to his accountant about creating a separate personal account. There was tension building, subtle but present, and it painted a picture far different from the one Anika had offered. Detectives expanded the search, requesting access to Anika's phone records and laptop. At first her devices appeared clean, almost too clean. Many of her messages had been deleted, and her browsing history had been cleared just 2 days before Rajiv's death. But forensic techs were able to recover fragments. Buried beneath layers of deleted data, they found messages exchanged with a contact saved under the name Jay. These weren't just casual messages, they were emotional, romantic, and suggestive of a deep connection. One thread revealed that Jay had asked Anika for money to cover music equipment and rent. Another showed her sending him bank transfer confirmations. The account associated with Jay belonged to someone named Jackson Rivera. Detectives ran a quick search and found that Jackson was a 25-year-old aspiring musician with no steady job and a long trail of unpaid debts. He lived in a rundown apartment in Echo Park and maintained a modest presence on social media, where he posted song clips and pictures with vague captions about hustling for the dream. In one post, he thanked a special angel for believing in him. Detectives began to piece together the narrative. Anika had not only been siphoning money from the joint account, but had been supporting a much younger man financially and emotionally. While Rajiv worked long shifts at the hospital, Anika had been living a secret life. The pattern was chillingly methodical. Transfers were made in small increments to avoid suspicion. She had created a secondary email. One entry read, "He says we need to be brave, that he'll wait for me, but how long can I live this lie?" Another, more recent one said, "I can't go on like this, something has to change." Anika hadn't just been swept up in a reckless affair. She had invested her time, money and identity into a fantasy that was beginning to feel like a promise. She believed in Jackson. She believed he loved her, and it now seemed that she was willing to destroy everything else in her life to make that love real. Detectives weren't sure yet how far she had gone, but they knew one thing for certain: Rajiv's death was no accident. It was the result of a carefully constructed illusion, one that had turned fatally real. By the time investigators fully grasped the extent of Anika Patel's secret life, the narrative of a grieving widow had been replaced by something far more complex and unsettling. What had once seemed like a conventional marriage was now clearly a facade, one hiding months, perhaps years of deception. Anika hadn't merely been unfaithful. She had been living a dual existence, splitting her time, emotions and resources between two entirely separate lives. The neighbors who had known Anika for nearly a decade were stunned as more details emerged. She had always been the embodiment of grace, soft-spoken, well-dressed and ever-present at cultural gatherings. She helped coordinate community events, and was known for her warm hospitality. People admired her for maintaining strong cultural roots while adapting so seamlessly to life in America. No one had suspected anything unusual. She smiled often, spoke little, and rarely drew attention to herself. But behind closed doors, she was orchestrating something no one could have imagined. The duality of her life was both meticulous and alarming. Investigators learned that Anika kept two phones, one for her family and community, and a second, prepaid device used solely for her communications with Jackson. That phone had been cleverly hidden in the bottom drawer of a locked filing cabinet, camouflaged among old bank documents. Forensic technicians recovered thousands of messages exchanged over encrypted apps. These weren't the fleeting texts of an impulsive affair, they were part of a structured relationship, complete with long-term plans and emotional dependency. One text exchange revealed that Anika had promised to move in with Jackson once things were resolved. Another showed her expressing fear that Rajiv was beginning to notice her distraction. "He's asking questions," she wrote. "I think he knows something," Jackson had replied. "Then maybe it's time we stop waiting." This text, casual, almost flippant, took on a darker meaning when paired with what came next. Rajiv, in the weeks leading up to his death, had started quietly moving funds into a separate account, possibly as a way to protect himself from further financial losses. He had also searched online for legal advice related to marital fraud and separation. These weren't actions taken lightly. They indicated that Rajiv had begun to consider confronting Anika, or even leaving her. He was slowly disentangling himself, unaware that every move he made was pushing her closer to desperation. The strain of juggling two realities appeared to be taking a toll on Anika as well. Her personal journal, recovered from the West Hollywood condo, documented the mental and emotional unraveling. She wrote about anxiety, fear and sleepless nights. She feared being exposed, feared losing Jackson, but most of all she feared the return to the life she had come to resent, one where she felt unseen, controlled by tradition and bound by expectation. One particularly chilling entry said, "No one would believe me if I told them how empty I feel. Rajiv doesn't see me, I'm a housekeeper to him. Jackson sees who I really am, he loves me, he listens." The contrast between how she portrayed Rajiv publicly and how she viewed him privately was stark. While the community saw a hard-working, loving husband, Anika saw an obstacle, someone standing in the way of a future she believed she deserved. The traditional role she had been playing for years had become, in her mind, a kind of prison, and Jackson, wild and unpredictable, offered the key to freedom. The deeper investigators dug, the more deliberate everything appeared. Anika had planned her life with Jackson carefully, securing the condo, funneling money, hiding evidence, but that level of planning, that need for secrecy, also suggested something more chilling. This wasn't just a romantic escape, it was a transformation, a total rejection of the life she once embraced, and for Rajiv Patel, that transformation would ultimately cost him everything. With the investigation deepening, detectives began to shift their focus from unraveling the affair to understanding how far Anika Patel had been willing to go to protect it. The motive was now clear: love, obsession, and the promise of a new life with Jackson Rivera. But motive alone wasn't enough. To prove murder, the police needed concrete signs of planning, execution and cover-up. It didn't take long for those signs to surface. Investigators returned to the Patel home, this time with a more thorough search warrant. Forensic teams combed every corner, analyzing overlooked details from the initial visit. In the master bedroom closet, they found a pair of rubber gloves, slightly damp and tucked inside a shoebox. On one of the gloves was a faint smear of what later tested positive as Rajiv's blood. In the trash bin beneath the kitchen sink were scraps of packaging from nylon rope, purchased recently.
When checked against local store receipts, one matched a transaction made by Anika at a nearby hardware store just 6 days before Rajiv's death. A visit to that hardware store yielded even more damning evidence. Security footage showed Anika at the checkout counter, purchasing rope, duct tape, and heavy-duty garbage bags. Her expression was calm, her actions precise. She paid in cash. The timestamp on the footage placed her there late in the evening, alone, wearing a hoodie and large sunglasses, an odd outfit considering the warm weather and her usual polished appearance. Back at the Patel residence, a tech expert retrieved data from the home's smart assistant device. Voice command logs showed several deleted queries that had been recovered through the system's backup cache. Among them were searches for how long does it take for carbon monoxide to kill and how to make it look like an accident in a garage. The searches were made in the early hours of the morning, long after Rajiv was presumed asleep. These weren't idle curiosities, they were chillingly specific and pointed directly to premeditation. Investigators also re-examined the garage. Though it had already been swept for evidence, a second, more detailed analysis revealed faint scratch marks on the floor, marks that suggested something heavy had been dragged a short distance. These weren't consistent with Rajiv simply collapsing from carbon monoxide poisoning. The pattern suggested movement, someone had repositioned his body. This, coupled with the medical examiner's final report, which confirmed strangulation as the primary cause of death, left no doubt Rajiv hadn't simply died in his sleep. He had been silenced. Phone records further solidified the timeline. Anika had texted Jackson just an hour after the time frame in which Rajiv was believed to have been killed. The message was brief, but cryptic. It read, "It's done. I'll see you soon." Investigators traced her movements that night using cell tower pings and confirmed she had left the house shortly after 2 a.m., traveling in the direction of her West Hollywood condo. Traffic cameras captured her vehicle at 2 different intersections along the route. Still, Anika maintained her innocence. When brought in for questioning again, she repeated the same story. She had gone to bed early, woke up, and found Rajiv in the garage. Her tone was flat, her emotions measured. But behind her composure, detectives noticed subtle changes, less confidence in her words, slight hesitations when asked to clarify the timeline, and moments of blank silence when confronted with evidence. In the eyes of law enforcement, this was no longer a mystery, it was a carefully executed murder, staged to look like a tragedy. Anika had underestimated the digital breadcrumbs left behind, the surveillance systems she lived around every day, and the technology embedded in her own home. Every lie she told unraveled a little more with each discovery. What began as a love affair had mutated into something sinister. With every step, Anika had crossed invisible lines, until there was no way back, and though she believed she had covered her tracks, the truth was beginning to take shape, one deliberate choice at a time. The moment the police arrested Anika Patel, the quiet suburban world around her home shifted from shock to scandal. The headlines in local newspapers screamed of betrayal and murder. Friends and neighbors who once admired her now whispered behind closed doors, struggling to reconcile the image of the graceful housewife with that of a calculated killer. The case quickly became a media sensation, with reporters camping outside the Patel residence, eager to unravel the mystery behind the perfect family's collapse. Anika was charged with first-degree murder, financial fraud, and conspiracy. But the weight of the evidence was only part of the story. What baffled investigators and captivated the public alike was the stark transformation in her demeanor. The once poised and calm woman now appeared guarded, withdrawn, and at times defiant during court hearings. Her lawyers insisted she was innocent, claiming that the evidence was circumstantial and that she was a grieving widow overwhelmed by tragedy. Behind the courtroom walls, the prosecution built its case meticulously. They presented the financial trail, showing how Anika had diverted thousands of dollars from joint accounts to Jackson Rivera. They laid out the timeline of deceit, illustrating the numerous deleted messages, hidden phone, and secret condo. The damning hardware store footage and the forensic evidence tied her directly to the murder scene. Most chilling of all were the voice command searches and the cryptic texts to Jackson following Rajiv's death. The courtroom became a stage for the dark secrets of Anika's double life to be revealed. Testimonies from neighbors and friends painted a portrait of a woman living in two worlds, one of tradition and respectability, the other of reckless passion and deception. Psychologists called in by the defense described Anika as a woman trapped by cultural expectations, isolated and vulnerable to manipulation. Yet the prosecution argued that vulnerability did not excuse cold-blooded murder. Meanwhile, the investigation into Jackson Rivera deepened. Police discovered that he had a history of minor offenses, including petty theft and drug possession, but no previous violent behavior. Interviews with acquaintances revealed a young man desperate for success, willing to exploit Anika's wealth and affection. There was speculation that Jackson may have pressured or influenced Anika to commit the crime, but concrete evidence tying him to the murder was elusive. The public was left to wonder, was Anika the mastermind acting alone, or was Jackson a hidden force behind the deadly plan? The line between victim and perpetrator blurred as the story unfolded. Was Anika truly a cold-hearted murderer, or a woman pushed beyond her limits by love and desperation? Did Jackson's presence represent hope or danger? The answers were buried in the complex web of secrets, lies, and shattered dreams. As the trial progressed, new twists emerged. A witness came forward claiming to have seen a suspicious figure near the Patel home on the night of the murder, someone matching Jackson's description. Surveillance footage showed a car resembling Jackson's parked near the neighborhood hours before the estimated time of death. These pieces of evidence hinted at a direct involvement, but without proof of intent or action, prosecutors struggled to charge him. In the midst of this turmoil, the community grappled with the implications. The story was no longer just about a murder, it was about the fragile veneer of appearances, the pressures of cultural expectations, and the dangerous cost of secrets kept too long. Families whispered warnings to their children about trust and betrayal, while others questioned how well anyone could truly know the people living next door. Anika's trial became a focal point for conversations about identity, ambition, and the lengths people might go to reclaim their freedom. With every day that passed, the mystery deepened, keeping the public and the court on edge. No one could predict how the story would end, but one thing was certain: the quiet life of the Patel family was forever shattered, and the truth behind Rajiv's death was more haunting than anyone had imagined.
As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a battleground of conflicting narratives and hidden truths. The prosecution's case was strong, built on a foundation of forensic evidence, digital footprints, and a clear motive. But the defense fought back fiercely, challenging every piece of evidence and painting Anika Patel as a victim caught in a web of circumstance and misunderstanding. The defense lawyers argued that the forensic evidence was circumstantial and that there was no direct proof linking Anika to the actual murder. They emphasized that the carbon monoxide poisoning could have been accidental, a tragic consequence of a malfunctioning garage door sensor or faulty car exhaust system. The bruising on Rajiv's neck, they claimed, could have been the result of a medical condition or a fall. The defense also attacked the reliability of the deleted messages, suggesting they could have been fabricated or misinterpreted. Central to the defense's strategy was the portrayal of Anika as a devoted wife who had made mistakes but was not capable of murder. They highlighted her cultural background, emphasizing the pressures she faced living between two worlds, the expectations of her traditional Indian upbringing and the complexities of modern American life. Psychologists testified about Anika's mental state, describing symptoms of depression and anxiety, but stopping short of labeling her dangerous or violent. Yet the prosecution was relentless. They brought in financial experts to detail how Anika had systematically drained their accounts, transferring money under false pretenses. They called forensic experts who explained how the bruises on Rajiv's neck were consistent with strangulation and how the toxicology report indicated sedatives were administered before his death. Security footage and phone data painted a picture of careful planning and deceit. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from the recovered voice command searches on the smart home device. Experts testified that the searches were not random but clearly linked to someone with knowledge of the house and intent to stage an accident. The jury was shown the exact phrases Anika had searched for in the early hours of the morning, questions about carbon monoxide poisoning and ways to cover up a crime. Meanwhile, the mystery of Jackson Rivera continued to hang over the case. Although he had not been charged with any crime related to Rajiv's death, prosecutors hinted at his potential influence on Anika. They introduced testimonies from friends and acquaintances who described Jackson as manipulative and controlling. They suggested that Jackson had preyed on Anika's vulnerabilities, fueling her fantasies of escape and freedom. The defense countered by arguing that Jackson was nothing more than a struggling artist and that Anika's relationship with him was consensual and complicated but not criminal. They questioned the validity of the witnesses' statements and suggested that prosecutors were using Jackson as a scapegoat to deflect attention from the true complexities of the case. Throughout the trial, the courtroom atmosphere was tense and charged. The media coverage was intense, with reporters dissecting every detail and broadcasting updates to an eager public. Viewers across the country watched as a seemingly ordinary woman was slowly stripped of her innocence in the glare of the spotlight. As closing arguments approached, both sides made passionate appeals. The prosecution urged the jury to see through the lies and deception, to hold Anika accountable for the cold and calculated murder she had orchestrated. The defense pleaded for understanding, asking the jury to consider the emotional and cultural turmoil that had led to a tragic and fatal mistake. The jury was left with a difficult decision. They had been presented with evidence of love and betrayal, manipulation and desperation, truth and deception. The question was whether the crime was a premeditated act of murder or a tragic accident compounded by years of hidden pain. Outside the courtroom, families and friends of both Rajiv and Anika awaited the verdict. The suburban neighborhood that had once been a picture of calm was now a backdrop to a story of heartbreak and darkness. Whatever the outcome, the lives of everyone involved had been irrevocably changed. After weeks of intense deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the community. Anika Patel was found guilty of second-degree murder, financial fraud, and conspiracy. The decision reflected the jury's conclusion that while the murder may not have been meticulously pre-planned down to the last detail, it was intentional and driven by a deep motive of betrayal and desperation. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Anika's face remained calm, almost unreadable, as the weight of the decision settled. For many, it was the moment justice was served for Rajiv Patel, a respected doctor whose life had been violently ended by the woman he had trusted most. For others, it marked the tragic downfall of a woman torn between two worlds, whose secret life spiraled into destruction. The sentencing phase that followed was grim. The judge emphasized the gravity of Anika's actions, highlighting the cold manipulation involved, the financial deception, the hidden affair, and the callous murder disguised as an accident. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in a maximum security prison. The court also ordered restitution for the financial damages caused to Rajiv's estate and further legal restrictions to prevent Anika from contacting Jackson Rivera. Public reaction was mixed. Many felt relief that the truth had been uncovered and justice achieved, but others expressed sympathy for Anika's complicated circumstances. Discussions erupted about the pressures faced by immigrant women caught between traditional expectations and modern freedoms, and how those pressures could lead to tragic outcomes. Meanwhile, attention turned to Jackson Rivera. Though never charged with any crime related to Rajiv's murder, the investigation into his role remained open. Law enforcement suspected that he had influenced Anika's decisions and may have encouraged her dangerous behavior. However, the lack of direct evidence left prosecutors unable to pursue further charges. Jackson disappeared from public view soon after the trial, cutting off all known contact with Anika and relocating to an unknown location. The neighborhood where the Patels had lived was forever changed. Friends who once greeted Anika warmly now avoided her home. The house, once a symbol of stability and success, was put on the market months after the trial and remained unsold for a long time. The story of the affair and murder became a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. Rajiv Patel's family struggled to come to terms with the loss. His parents returned to India, heartbroken but proud of their son's legacy. His colleagues at the hospital established a scholarship fund in his name to honor his dedication to medicine and community service. Yet the shadow of the tragedy lingered, a stark contrast to the bright life he had once led. For Anika, prison was a new reality. Interviews with former inmates who crossed paths with her described a woman who remained distant, reflective, and sometimes haunted by her past. She reportedly spent time writing letters, reading, and occasionally speaking about regret and loneliness. Though the outside world had judged her harshly, those who knew her story hinted at the complexities beneath her actions: love twisted into obsession, desperation driving decisions, and a secret world that had finally collapsed. The case of Anika Patel and Rajiv's murder left a lasting impact on the community and beyond. It became a story studied in law schools, cited in discussions about domestic crimes fueled by hidden relationships, and referenced in conversations about the cultural and emotional conflicts faced by immigrants adapting to new lives. It was a stark reminder that beneath even the quietest surfaces, dark secrets could fester and explode with devastating consequences. As time passed, the world slowly moved on, but the story of the elegant Indian housewife and her deadly secret remained a haunting chapter in Los Angeles's true crime history, an affair turned murder that shattered lives and exposed the fragile line between love and destruction. Years after the trial ended and the headlines faded, the story of Anika Patel and the murder of Rajiv Patel continued to linger in the collective memory of the community. The quiet streets where the family once lived had changed, with new neighbors unaware of the dark history that had unfolded behind closed doors. Yet, for those who had witnessed the unraveling of a seemingly perfect life, the case remained a haunting example of how appearances could mask the deepest secrets. In the years that followed, the Patel home was eventually sold to a young family unaware of its past. The new owners made renovations, trying to erase the memories embedded in the walls. Still, whispers of the tragedy persisted in neighborhood conversations, a reminder that some stories refused to be forgotten. Local journalists revisited the case on its anniversaries, exploring the themes of love, betrayal, and cultural conflict that had made it so compelling. Anika, incarcerated far from the city she once called home, faced the slow passage of time within prison walls. Reports from prison officials described her as withdrawn but compliant, someone who rarely spoke about the past. Occasionally, she would participate in counseling sessions, reflecting on her choices and the path that had led her there. The letters she wrote revealed a woman grappling with regret, caught between acceptance and denial of what she had done. Jackson Rivera, the young musician at the heart of the affair, vanished from public life almost as quickly as he had appeared. Efforts to locate him after the trial proved fruitless. Friends claimed he had moved to another state, attempting to rebuild his life far away from the shadow of the scandal. Whether he felt guilt, fear, or simply wanted a fresh start remained a mystery. His brief moment of influence over Anika's life ended abruptly, leaving unanswered questions about his true role in the events that led to Rajiv's death. The Patel family's tragedy sparked broader conversations in the community and beyond. Cultural organizations began hosting forums and support groups aimed at helping immigrant women facing isolation and conflicting expectations. Mental health advocates cited the case as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing emotional struggles before they escalate into destructive behavior. The intersection of culture, identity, and personal freedom became a focal point in discussions about preventing similar tragedies. Law enforcement agencies also took lessons from the investigation. The role of technology, smart home devices, encrypted messaging apps, and surveillance cameras had been pivotal in uncovering the truth. Training programs emphasized the importance of digital forensics in modern crime solving, recognizing that criminals often leave behind invisible trails in the digital world. At the heart of the story remained the victim, Rajiv Patel, a man whose life was cut short by betrayal and violence. Those who knew him remembered his dedication as a doctor, his kindness, and the quiet strength with which he navigated his life. Memorials in his honor continued to serve as a testament to the man behind the headlines, a reminder that his legacy was more than the tragic circumstances of his death. For many, the case served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hidden lives and unspoken pain. It was a story that revealed how love, when mixed with deceit and desperation, could spiral into darkness. It exposed the fragile boundaries between respectability and rebellion, tradition and freedom, truth and lies. As time passed, the true crime story of Anika Patel, once an elegant housewife with a dark secret, became part of Los Angeles's complex tapestry of human stories. It was a tale told not just to shock or entertain, but to reflect on the human capacity for both hope and destruction. In the end, it was a reminder that beneath every face, there can be a secret world waiting to be uncovered, and sometimes, those secrets come at the highest cost.